Alright guys, we're finally at the end. It's part 5, so let's finish this up. What are your thoughts on paleo for non-lifters? I know you don't like it in general, but I can't find any posts of yours going into detail on why exactly. Well, the thing is, you can't even define paleo. People who follow paleo diets don't even know what paleo is because 17 different authors have wrote books with different definitions. Anthropologists know that it's a bullshit term, so how do you even follow a diet that nobody who follows the diet can even figure out what in the hell is supposed to be on it? That's the biggest problem. It's confusing. Number 2, it's arbitrary food restrictions. Now, for people who are non-lifters, well, if you're a non-lifter and you're trying to get into shape and get healthy, you're shooting yourself in the foot already. You're already doing it wrong. But that aside, you run into the other problem of some people will lose weight and get into better shape using any diet that has food restrictions because you cut the food options down. If you have less foods that you're allowed to eat, and particularly if most of the foods you're eating, because most foods that people talk about being paleo are fairly high satiation, some of them are not, then you're possibly going to lose weight. But a lot of people will gain weight on any sort of diet that doesn't focus on tracking calories and intake, but only on food restrictions. Sometimes it can reduce quality of life because it can make social situations awkward. They can't always enjoy the foods they like in moderation. And so what ultimately happens is that it reduces quality of life, and it still fails for a lot of people because, again, you're talking about a diet to where your focus is upon good and bad foods versus actual energy intake. And so it is very possible for you to just gain fat and get fat on that type of diet if you're not careful. Doesn't work for everyone. So that's the problem with those sort of diets, really. I'm just not a fan. I think it's silly, and there's no real scientific basis behind it. I don't have a problem with the idea that, yeah, you should be eating more fruits, vegetables, and lean proteins. Great. But when you take it any further than that, it becomes moronic. And it becomes unscientific, and that's exactly what the paleo diet is. And there are plenty of people who can get really fat following whatever version of paleo diets that are out there because it doesn't focus upon the important things, and that's energy intake and hitting your target numbers on the things that you need for your body to function optimally. And they try to make the argument, well, our ancestors didn't do that. Well, your ancestors' goal was not to get into shape or to live to be 100. Your ancestors' goal was to survive long enough to make it to your next meal historically. And we live longer today than people did in Paleolithic times, even eating absolute shit diets. We have over twice the life expectancy in terms of total years. So put that in perspective. All right, next question. Will becoming more efficient at, say, riding the bike carry over to being able to run further? Like just becoming better at one form of cardio, subsequently carry over to another? Well, yes and no. That's literally like asking me, will your squat carry over to your deadlift? Will your power clean carry over to your bench press? Yeah, to some extent, because the same energy systems are being worked, but you have to remember that cardio and endurance training is just as varied and diverse in goals, specificity, programming as resistance training is. So if you improve at one type of cardio, it will probably improve you at another unless you are already very good at the other and you've backed off using it to use a new one. So it's an issue of programming. I mean, obviously things like VO2 max and capillarization and energy storage and the energy systems involved are going to have a carryover, but the specificity of training may not. And you've got to remember that running and cycling entails a lot of different things. There's at least half a dozen different types of competitive running that actually rely upon different energy systems to some extent. So you can't even lump them all together like that. So your question is really far more complex than you think it is. But in general, yes, if you improve your endurance capacity, your endurance will improve around the board, but it may not give you the specificity of training you need for some sort of specific competitive environment. All right, last question of the week. If the outlying muscles are relaxed as much as possible during an exercise, is that putting more stress on the target muscle and therefore making a deeper inroad, stimulating more hypertrophy? All right, this is a type of nonsense that bodybuilders come up with. It's like what I've talked about, what CJ Allen talked about with bodybuilders looking at the body as a stack of Legos. It doesn't work that way. No, when you relax other muscles so that you can focus exclusively on a primary mover, what actually happens is that you reduce the amount of weight you can use, and you actually reduce the radiant effect and the neural system's priming of the muscle you're trying to work. So you can actually reduce the amount of fibers you recruit. There's a reason why you should grip bars tight. There's a reason you should flex your abs and compress against your abdominal wall when you're doing even an isolation movement, and that's because it improves the neural efficiency of the muscle you're trying to work. It allows it to recruit more effectively by priming the nervous system. And so by relaxing things, no, you reduce total performance, you reduce total muscle stimulation. You shouldn't do that. And I'm not saying your technique shouldn't be adjusted to work the primary mover. Like if you're trying to curl, and I hate to talk about curls here, but if you're letting the wrist come back, your forearm is still tight. You're still contracting your abs. You're still contracting your chest. But the problem is that in the case of the forearm back, you're taking the forearm out of there as the primary mover, where if you're curling up like this, the forearm may be doing more of the actual curling than the bicep, moving the weight directly. So that's different, but that's a technique difference. Either way, the muscles are all still tight. And if you're loosening up other muscles and trying to just relax and focus just on the primary mover, you're not only going to reduce the weight move, you're actually going to reduce the neural efficiency of the target muscle. You're actually going to shoot yourself in the foot. And the only reason you see really massive bodybuilders say this and get away with this is because they're on shitloads of drugs that you probably can't afford, and they have better genetics than you or I have. And they're still going to get big doing that sort of silly shit. But the reality is, no, you shouldn't be thinking in those terms at all. It's not going to help you, and it's not the way that the body works. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Oh, let me pull that up and do that again for you. And I'll show you guys Aries because he's been sitting at my feet during this whole video. Look at those aesthetics on him.